Oh.
Hello. Testing. Ramel Shearer. Can you hear me?
Testing. I test it. Oh, you hear me?
Close, but you can hear me.
Yay. Oh, hi, Mommy.
Hi, Mommy. Okay, so Ramel just made a sign, which I think means we're live.
Okay.
So, good evening, everybody. Thank you for those of you in attendance. Thank you for coming to TERN Gallery tonight. And those of you who are tuned in on our super high-tech stream, thank you for tuning in as well. So we're here tonight to speak with Cydne Jasmin Coleby.
Hello.
On the event of her solo show here at TERN Gallery entitled One of the Boys. I'm just going to read you a little bit about Cydne for those of you that don't know her as well as all of us here do this evening. Cydne Jasmin Coleby, born in 1993, is an interdisciplinary artist from the Bahamas, primarily working in digital and mixed media. Her practice centers on digital and mixed media again, obviously. There we go, repeating ourselves in our little blurb. We need to edit that. Collages that investigate the transformative effects of trauma through a personal lens. Trained on home soil, Coleby pursued her associate's degree in fine art from the University of the Bahamas, which is the highest achievable arts qualification in the country, which is a whole other conversation, before moving on to freelance and graphic design with a specialty in brand design. And actually, we worked together as when you were working as a designer. And that's one of the ways we know each other. I was trying to remember how we met and I couldn't. But anyway, after working successfully for several local entities and later communications manager for the current Bahamas Gallery and Art Center, Coleby recommitted herself to her art practice in 2018 with her work in the 9th National Exhibition, NE9, The Fruit and the Seed at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. And I think we're going to see that in the slideshow a little later on. Since then, she has exhibited both locally and internationally in Europe, Asia, and the United States, as well as the Caribbean. And her work is found in collections worldwide, including the Netherlands, Israel, France, the Bahamas, and the USA. So for those that didn't know, Cydne, it's a little bit. Actually, how did we meet each other? I'm trying to think. I was trying to think back because I've been home for 12 years. And I was like, when did we first have an, like, I can remember lots of moments, but I don't remember which was the first.
I also cannot remember which was the first, but I probably was a student at
you were definitely a student
at COB, now UB, and I think I came at the gallery, at the National Art Gallery, and that's when I might have met you, because I would have known John. He would have been my professor at the time, and he was also working with you.
That was about 11, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And since then, I've had the great privilege to watch Cydne's practice grow and become just richer and more exciting. And it's been a real joy to live with this show. I think we're going to see some images on the slide as we go through to see how it's become more complex, your way of using materials and the things you work with. So as the little blurb said, a lot of Cydne's work has been about kind of mining traumas, both in society at large and in your personal life, very often through archives.
Yeah.
And those archives are very often family family archives, images, photographs she finds. And I think, well, maybe again, as some of the images go by, we'll talk about some of those. But this particular body of work for this show, One of the Boys, is about a videotape and that Cydne found.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it before we're going to watch a little bit of it so you can get a vibe? And
sure.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for everybody for showing up. It's a real pleasure. So yeah, with the video, so I always use like family photos and archives, like you stated. And my mother being very generous, like while she was cleaning, she found some tapes, and she was like, "I don't know what's on here. Look to see what you find. Maybe it's useful." So
videotapes.
Yeah, video.
Young people in our audience, things that used to put in a machine and watch movies on.
Cassettes, if you want to be real about it. It was a little tiny cassettes. I had to find a space when I was traveling to New York. I found a place in Queens, one of the few places that could digitize them for me. So I got them digitized, was watching through them, and it was a bunch of like what I expected. Family videos, like holidays, special events. I got to my first Christmas and I was like, oh, cute, baby Cydne. And then it just instantly like switches to my dad in a bar. And that was like the treasure trove. I was so excited. Like, people get upset when they hear the story. It's just like, oh yeah, it was my first Christmas and it looks as though he like filmed over it to show himself with his friends in a bar. And I understand why that would be a problem, but for me, I was very excited to come across
like, material I can work with.
Material I could work with, but also by the time I was 6, my dad had stopped drinking. And at this time, for those who don't know, my dad had already passed away. So I was mining through them to navigate like grief and reconnect with people. And when I came across his videos, like I got to see my dad in a space that I knew, even if he was still living, I would never get to see him in.
So you got to see sort of like almost like not private, but a part of himself that he wouldn't have shared with you necessarily.
And through his eyes, because he's the one doing the filming. So it was almost like I was there with him, seeing things through his lens. And that was just amazing to come across. So I had this video since 2019, and I knew I wanted to work with it, but I didn't know exactly how I wanted to work with it. So when you guys approached me about doing a solo show, I was like, this is the time. I still don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but this feels right. I would love to have this.
And I think let's watch it and then let's talk about that afterwards. I think that choice was a really interesting choice. This is the space that you wanted to like mine this topic.
Yes.
So shall we have a little, Ramel, are you ready? So just right here, we can all enjoy baby Cydne. So we can all go, oh.
Just for a reference.
Just for like literally 1 second. Because then it gets wiped out by her dad going to his local bar.
Oh, but before you begin, just for a reference, we're not watching the whole video. The video is like quite long, but we're just going to show you the first like 5-6 minutes.
Let me put you on camera so I can have you film in my house. Boy, you look handsome too. Huh? You look handsome. That's Mr. Kendall Babs, my Moors Island friend. That gentleman is Mr. Lassie Doe. My good friend Lassie Doe. That's who that is, Mr. Lassie Doe. Let me bring him closer so you can see him good. Mr. Lassie Doe in person. One of the strongest men I know. Very handsome. I won't borrow his things, but he wouldn't lend it to me. Proprietor Larry Miller. Larry Miller. That's who that is, Larry Miller. You want to see him look that up? These fellas gambling. They're gambling.
get this boy. I don't want no help. Get bring it. That's a movie? Yeah, it's a movie. Yeah. Really?
Hello, Jim.
That's a movie? Yeah, it's a movie. You don't know. Hey, I appreciate something. That's a movie? Get the movie, boy. Get the fucking movie, boy. What a very get the movie. What's up? Fuck me.
That's the proprietor. Let me bring him in closer here. Frank Miller. That's who that is. That's Frank. That's in there.
You got it?
Yeah, I got it.
Fred. That's young Fred.
And that's Fred. That's Fred. That's Fred. Take a good look at him.
Yeah, you got it, Fred. Ever since he said him officially, yeah. That's simple. Hey, grab it, come. Grab it. Just look at that dude, fellow. Hey.
That's it. Frank Miller. Pope. What do you say, Pope? Jesse wouldn't even look at me, man.
Thanks, Ramel. I think there's a scene we're quite familiar with.
Oh, yes.
So, as you were saying, the premise for the show really is that your dad took this videotape of your first Christmas, and we do need to say that there's other footage of that first Christmas, so it's not quite as kind of strong as it sounds, like her whole Christmas has been wiped out. But I think you did talk about this metaphor of, because really the whole show is examining is the role of kind of bars in our community and the role of alcohol in our community and how alcohol is also tied in with tourism, and there's a lot of layers in there, and how we're sort of expected to always be quick to serve a drink, but then also how that even in our private life becomes. So really, why was that free? Because I think it's quite not brave necessarily, but to come and talk about that here specifically, to do a show based on this video in another city in the world would have less investment somehow. So what made this the moment to use this material?
So I made the decision to have the show here because on one level, it was just like, when you want to talk about family matters, you want to talk about it at home. And because I was talking about, this is one of the first shows I was very specifically talking about an aspect of Bahamian society, I didn't want to have this conversation in another country. And most of my shows have been in Europe. And I was just like, I'm not having this conversation in Europe first. I want to actually talk to Bahamians and get their feedback from it and just have this dialogue here before I go and talk about it somewhere else, for people to pass judgment on a situation where it's just like they might not fully understand it. They might have their own personal relationships with alcohol, and like I feel all countries and communities do, but I wanted to have that nuanced conversation here first. So that was one of the main reasons I wanted to deal with it here, but also because it was such a personal family archive, and it was like a lot of the story wasn't my own. I also felt a little bit more protective of it, and I didn't want to have it out into the greater world just yet. I just rather have it here first, and then let's talk about it and just test the waters, because this also is like a new direction for me, so it felt safer to just test the waters here on that level as well. So those were the main reasons.
One of the things we talked about when we were talking about this particular archival footage was this idea that there's a lot going on, really, is that first of all, it's a metaphor for the erasure of a relationship that can happen due to alcohol or any kind of self-medication that happens. So there's that, because literally it was wiped out. And that's not to say that your relationship with your dad was bad or any of that. So, but it was a sort of beautiful metaphor for what can happen. And then also it says something about choices you make when you're under the influence, choices that you make that maybe you might regret later on. And then also sort of the roles that bars play in our community, but also for me that somehow what you did in the paintings, and we'll talk about that some more, is that you put yourself in them.
Yes.
So one of the reasons we sat here wasn't just to have the title of the show, but also to see this beautiful painting where Cydne's really physically present in the most obvious way. Because in the other ones, she's always present, but in a much more subtle way. So there might just be a hand coming in, or there might be some eyes on the wallpaper in the background, and all of that is Cydne's, or her smile is on a bartender's face. And I think that's sort of beautiful, because also when this happened, it's like you were there, but also not there.
Yes.
You were under the video and at home. So talk about that a little bit, and that choice that you made, and kind of what that means to you, and how you felt when you came across this.
Came across the video. Yeah. So in all honesty, like when I saw the video, it felt as though I was able to actually eavesdrop and be a fly on the wall in this moment, because I don't know if my dad remembered that he did that. I don't know if he knew that like it would ever come to light that this was there. So for me, it felt like I was like entering into what would have been not entirely private space, but like a more personal space for him. And this
side of him that he might not have showed.
Yes.
Yeah.
My dad was very forthcoming with like his life. Any questions that I asked him, he would tell me, but this was just something that I never would have been able to see. Of course, I'm going to get like the butted up, this is for my daughter version. So it's just like, I got to actually see him in this space doing what he wanted to do with his friends. And for me, it was just like, I felt like I was one of the boys. And that's like how it came up. Well, how the title of the show came about. I was having a conversation with Larry Osementa, and I was telling him about what the show was about. And I was like, oh, it made me feel like I was one of the boys. And he's like, that's a great title for the show. And I was like, yes, it is. Thank you, Larry. So if you're watching, thank you. So I started to think about what it would be like me being in these spaces and how that shows up in different ways. Like me imparting my own opinions on the situation, because I tried my best through all of my investigation. Outside of the video, I did a lot of investigation about alcoholism. I interviewed people who were adjacent to alcoholism, people who worked in bars, people who had like their own concerns about their relationship with alcohol. And I was trying my best to not impart like any judgment, because I also see myself in these situations. And that was another thing that came about. Like I'm dating an American, and one time he came here, and please do not judge me, but I was driving home. At first we were at a bar, and he was like, he was tired. So I was like, okay, well, let's get our drinks to go. And he said, well, what? And I was like, don't worry about it.
I know that's a hard thing to explain to a foreigner. Yes.
So we got our drinks to go. And when I was driving home, without thinking, instinctively, I grabbed my drink while I was driving, and he whacked my hand. He's like, Cydne, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh. So that's why I'm just like, I recognize myself in these scenarios, in these situations. And I started to question my relationship, and that turned from the micro to macro. So in all of my research and thinking, I was just like trying my best to see like, how do I want to insert myself in these spaces, like being the fly on the wall, but imparting my own opinions and views about the situation, given a more modern context about what this like our relationship to alcohol is. So for this one, it was just like me putting my whole body into that space. And I recognized that if I was my dad, I would have a different experience in this bar, just because of the body I occupy.
Yeah, the title of this is something along the lines of "My daddy warned me about."
Oh, my mommy warned me about
my.
Yeah, my mommy warned me about men like you in places like this. So that was a part of like that was me thinking about my whole body being in the space. And then I have a few ones where my hands are like interjecting in different ways, whether it's just like trying to block the consumption of alcohol or me joining into it. So it's just like I've been all of these people. I've
played all the different roles in a way.
I played all the different roles. So that was what I was navigating in the work.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting at the opening here, and something we talked about as well, is, you know, the art world is very greased by alcohol, let's say. Like, you know, you do studio visits. I mean, not so much, I have to say not so much anymore, but like back when my husband was in the gallery world, you know, 20 years ago in Germany, you'd go to a studio visit at midday and believe me, a bottle of wine would get opened. Absolutely. At noon. And certainly openings, you know, very, you know, and so what we talked about with Cydne was, what should we do at the opening? Like, we're making this show about investigating alcohol in bars. So again, I don't want to say, you know, we weren't trying to pass judgment one way or the other, but we also wanted to think about, what about people that struggle with alcoholism, and how hard is it to go out then to openings or to go to social situations where you know you're going to meet alcohol, and what does that do? Does it stop you from being able to? So we said, okay, let's have the gallery be dry. So we decided the gallery would be like a safe space and a space where you could find refuge, and the alcohol would stay outside. And it was really interesting, sort of monitoring that and watching like how people engaged with that.
Yeah, and like at a certain point, it was just firmly ignored.
Firmly ignored. But I thought that was interesting too, right?
That was interesting.
The idea that, like, you know, at an opening, there has to be alcohol,
because you can't abandon your drink. It's just like, I want to engage with this, but like I can't abandon my drink, so it has to like come with me. And it might not be something as like as sinister as like it being an addiction, but it just might be like, oh, I'm drinking, I'm just gonna take it with me. But that's also something that I thought was pretty fascinating. Like, I know I've been out and like people joke when you stumble, it's just like, don't drop the drink. Like, they're more worried about you dropping your alcohol than they're worried about you hurting yourself. At least in my spaces. Maybe I have bad friends, but like, you know, I've encountered this like in a lot of spaces where it's just like, you feel in social settings, and especially like in party settings, like you feel more encouraged to drink. Like, you drinking or you tinking, this person just bibbing, like then you get shamed for just like, you've been bibbing on that drink all night. It's like, well, why can't I take my time with my drink? Maybe I don't want to be drunk, you know. Like, these are the things that like I started to think about a little bit more. I became more conscious of.
You know, there's a lot of judgment even if you don't want to drink. So I've been in situations with people who were like, I don't, and they won't actually say, well, I just don't drink. They'll just take it but not drink, because if you say, well, oh, I'm not drinking, it really becomes a thing. Like, people sometimes even get a bit upset with you if you're like, well, no, I'm actually not drinking. Less so now. I feel like at my age, I think we've lived through a transformation in a way, and I don't know if that's something you discovered in doing the research somehow. Like, how much has it changed and how much is it the same, do you feel?
I would say it's a little, like, I don't know how much it's actually changed, because I know I've been in spaces where I've just like said like, oh, I'm just drinking a Coke, and the whole room spun around, a Coke? Like, yeah, what, are you pregnant? They're like, this is like, no, I just don't feel like drinking right now. And it's like, oh, boring. Like, and it's like jokingly like shaming me, but it's still like at the root of it, they're shaming me. So I have experienced this. I don't know what it's like for maybe Gen Z and younger, because like the club scene is also reduced here. So maybe that changes a bit. But from my experience, it's just like, yeah, you still get expected to drink. And also, like, as a woman, it's different. And also, like, as a woman, to kind of prove yourself as to be like one of the boys, like, it's a question of how much can you drink? Can you hold your own with these guys? It's just like, oh, she's a lightweight, they like judge you. It's like, fine, but it's just like, also you feel this you hear this dialogue that you can't help but take in, that if I can't drink with you, then I'm not good enough. And I feel like men also get that sometimes too when they're drinking with like their elders. They're just like, oh, you can't handle this liquor. And it's just like, well, it's poison. You know, let's talk about it. Let's think about it. It's actual poison. Like, why should he be able to handle it to a certain levels, or anybody be able to handle it to certain levels. And I started to even think about that because I don't know what spaces of reprieve we have. And that's why I didn't want to pass so much judgment on the bar.
Yeah,
because
that was actually going to be sort of one of my questions in a way too, was that, you know, we can talk endlessly about like negative aspects, but something about bars being spaces of community as well, and being spaces where maybe you can escape a living situation that is small or uncomfortable, or where you find camaraderie or whatever it might be. And I did wonder how much, especially watching the video and knowing your dad, and how much you felt like, was there a positive aspect as well? Because I also noticed that, like, when you look at the video, it's quite dark, and you've made the, you know, they're darker than your last body of works in the sense that the colors are a bit, and they're not quite as kind of really like neon. I think people who don't know your work looking at it would be like, well, that's pretty colorful to me, but there's sort of like a more muted palette, but you still like, there is something celebratory going on in some of them, right? So I was interested in that kind of dynamic between the fact that, you know, there's this erasure of the video and there's this sort of walking away from the family and of absence from the family. But then there's also this sort of, again, a community being found and a sense of joy in some of them, especially this one with the bartender that I like. I think my favorite one in the back with the sky above. And I felt like the sky was very sort of like liberating somehow. Like you're not in an enclosed space, but you have this kind of, so can you talk to me a little bit about that, this kind of double sense going on between, the negative and the positive?
Oh yeah. So yes, I did think about, like, when I watched the video, even though it was dark because of the lighting, like there were certain elements in there where it's just like, I want to drink with them. Like I felt like enticed to like be in this space and like have a good time, because most of them like are, and you see like there are different zones in this bar where it's just like some people are playing cards, some people are just drinking, some people are just hanging out. So it's really like the space is not just about like, oh, we're just gonna get drunk, but it's just like, this is our hangout, and it just so happens that it's centered around alcohol, you know. So we've established like a members club in a sense, and this is where we go to see our peers and catch up, but it's just centered around alcohol. And I think about like, sometimes it's just like, you, not sometimes, but quite often, like you engage the bar in a celebratory way, or a way to like be like, okay, I'm coming here to relieve some stress. When you see your friends, it's like a good time, you know. And when somebody's rowdy at the bar, they messing it up. Like, this is not what we came here for. Like, please go home. There are laws around this. Like, you must kick the rowdy person out. So even though I understand, like, when they enter into this space, like they might be abandoning something on the other side, but they're entering into this to catch a break, in my sense. Like, at least that was one of my perspectives. And even in one of my conversations with somebody, he was telling me that when he drank, like sometimes that was the only way that he could release some of the weight that he was holding. So it's not always that you're using this to run away, but you're sometimes using it to access. So I didn't look at these spaces as just like these hellholes, because like when you're in it, that's not what it is. If drugs felt bad, we wouldn't use them. You know, you go there to feel good. So I still wanted that element to be there, because that's the honest bit about it. But the deeper conversations about leaving family or what else happens in these spaces, like that can get blurred, because even when you're in it, you don't see it.
Right. Do you actually still have relationships with any of these people?
So one of them, I did, and I really wished I could talk to him, but tragically he passed away during the pandemic. Yeah, it's okay. And it's weird because he's the person like in the video, and I knew he was my dad's like longtime friend, and I didn't realize like how far they went back. I just knew that he was always around. And when my dad passed away, he was the person that was with him. He was the person that like called the ambulance. So it was just like, man, you've been here through it, like from thick and thin. And even when my dad stopped drinking, like he still was friends with him. So it's just like, this was your bar friend who maintained through it all.
Yeah, because you said your dad actually at a certain point stopped drinking,
but
still went and hung out with all the guys.
Well, some of them for sure. Like, see, he maintained like quite a few of them, which was pretty like it spoke to him as a person that they were still like, yeah, we still want to hang out with you. Like they get him like O'Doul's. I don't know if anybody's had O'Doul's, but it's like the non-alcoholic
beer. Yeah.
So yeah, he still was able to maintain his friends, which I thought also was interesting because when you change your environments and your spaces, you usually like not intentionally, but these sort of relationships fizzle out. So I also thought that was like, oh, that's pretty nice. But some of these people, no, I don't know them. There's one that I really wish that I did know, and it's Fred. He's so fun in this video. Like I love Fred so much.
Because I was just wondering, like, how they would have felt like with this exploration. And I know you spoke to your mum about diving into this, and
yeah,
how was it like? Again, coming home, because I know at the beginning you said, well, I really wanted to have this conversation here because it is this sort of conversation about home, but at the same time, like, these are real people who could be right around the corner. So was there any kind of like angst in that, or feeling of like, is anyone going to see this or feel the wrong way? I mean, sometimes ZNS is going to come. It's for people watching from away. That's our local TV station that, they might actually end up on. Did you think about how that could have been?
Yeah, I did think about that, and that's why I didn't like disfigure anybody. I normally disfigure disfigure myself, and I didn't want to do that to any of these people, because it's just like, no, I don't want to do that to you because I don't know your story. I don't know it enough to say that I want to impart like a narrative on you as a person, but you're just in this space, and that's why I'm the person that's like disfigured or doing all the weird stuff in here. Or if there is somebody, like how the bartender has my smile, like his identity is like blurred out. So it's just like, it's almost like it's just me. So I was cognizant of that. And I did ask my mom, like watching the videos, like, did she remember any of these people? And she said most of them, she wasn't familiar with them. And I tried to go to this bar, but sadly it's closed, and it closed a while ago. But I would have loved to like been able to talk to all these people. I even asked like some of his friends about it, and they couldn't remember.
Is it such a common thing for people not watching? Like, it's such a common, like every neighborhood has a bar, and the bar is next to a church and a betting shop normally, and a liquor store, and they're all kind of, it's a sort of whole kind of community built around those things, which is a really interesting combination.
Yeah.
So there's another space that there's a lot of alcohol, and that's the Junkanoo shacks. And I think talking about sort of escapism and finding community and finding a way to release yourself from the cares of the world, I think the Junkanoo shacks also kind of come into play there as well. And I've met a lot of women who are like, yeah, I'm a Junkanoo widow. Like, I just don't see my husband for 4 months. And I think that also kind of speaks to your technique. So I'd like to now speak a little bit more about really, your work in a more practical sense. So for people that are tuning in and maybe don't know Cydne's practice, you probably can see some, I hope. Maybe there's some pictures coming up while we're talking. Yes, Ramel saying yes. So it's collaged. There's a lot of use of paper. There's a lot of use of glitter. There's a lot of use of gemstones and things like that. How much is that conscious? And how much because I think, very often, like when we do fairs, people are like, oh, I could see a lot of your artists are doing this and that. And I'm like, well, that's a lot to do with our kind of vernacular. That's like a common. So how much do you feel like how much of that is conscious for you and how much is unconscious?
I think I've found the sweet spot at this point of it being conscious and unconscious. Like when I first started back, or at least reintroduced my practice in 2018, like it was me. I'd been working digitally as a designer for so long that when it came to like the analog stuff, I was just playing around, which was fun. So I was really thinking about the different ways that I could impart or include visual language that was familiar to me, whether that be like crepe paper, the glitters, the gems, all that stuff. But now it's just like I'm no longer thinking about the material as just a material, but the material as an element of dialogue. So I think about what does this print mean more. I think more about, and I mean, I did in the beginning, like when I had the glitter, it meant something. And it still does in different spaces. But it's just like now it's just like I no longer think about the material as just like, oh, this cool thing. I think about it as just like, how does this add to the narrative of the work, like almost completely. So that's
because there are some things like there's certain fabrics that again, people that aren't, and I think that's something we've talked about too, which is interesting, is to show things at home. There's a whole layer of explaining that doesn't have to happen.
Yes.
Right, because people just get it.
Yes.
Like you all are like looking and you get it. You get what an androsia print is. Whereas when we show these away, we have to be like, well, this is this, and that is so this fabric. For those watching who are not here, is again, it's like based on an androsia fabric, which is a very specific batik fabric that is made on a particular island here. That is kind of almost like a national dress, right? When you got to wear something on Majority Rule Day, you break out your androsia.
Yes, you do.
Print, and you use that a lot.
I do. I use that because it's just like one of those motifs that Bahamians automatically see it and they're just like, that's Bahamian. But also I have a lot of roots in Andros. Yeah, like if you go to Andros, I think it was used to be called Morgan's Bluff. Don't quote me, but there's like there's a section that used to be called it used to be called Coleby Way, and now it's called Morgan's Bluff. And there's a lot of Colbys in North Andros. Okay. So that's like one of the reasons why I was interested in using like a lot of androsia outside of it being like again one of those very familiar prints and patterns.
And is there something in there of like wanting to sort of, are you, even though it's sort of easier to be home and to not have to explain, is there a pride in explaining? Like when do you do it in an intentional way such that like when people see your work away, they have to know more about the Bahamas? Is that something that's important to you?
I do appreciate that. I do like enjoy that dialogue. But another element of it is like I'm very interested in what they see because they don't know, because I also feel like that's a part of the work. And like it's almost as though when you have somebody in your life and you know that they're having a bad day and then they have a certain type of response because you know them, and it's just like you're not fazed by it, but somebody else who's just like not privy to what they've been through or like their whole backstory, they take it a different way. So that's like another thing that I'm very interested in when it comes to navigating identity and situations. It's just like, oh, if I had known, like, would I look at this differently? So that's a part of why I wanted to show this here, so I didn't have to do all this explaining. But it's just like I didn't want to have that conversation with people that just didn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of having to escape or self-medicate is obviously a pretty common. Pretty common
oh yes, trait. It's pretty common.
You can definitely find a Trinkhalle somewhere in Germany where a similar situation is going on.
Yeah. I knew that this was a conversation I could have just about everywhere, but it was the nuances of the conversation that I wanted to have here. And even like it's funny, like this has nothing. Just to circle back, like when you said like the coincidence with Junkanoo, like the videos also takes place around Junkanoo. Oh, yeah, they make a comment on it in the video. They're just like, oh, they let y'all take that win last night, and I see somebody in like a Saxon shirt. So
I saw the Saxon shirt.
Yeah. So it's probably like the Boxing Day when this all happened. So it's like also ties into like, oh, this is my typical aesthetic, but it also like really ties into like what was happening in the time.
Was there anyone in your family who was in the shack, or was that just kind of peripheral?
Yeah, I don't know of anybody being in the shack. I mean, no, I don't know of anybody being in the shack. I wish they were.
Did you ever go?
I've been adjacent. Yeah,
I think we'll probably all feel like that.
Yeah.
So how much do you feel like, I mean, obviously a lot of this is about your dad, and I know there's you have a tattoo on your arm which appears in a couple of the works as well. There's like a disembodied arm, which again, sometimes you're covering the drink, like in this lenticular print here. And for those of you that haven't seen the show yet, come when we're done talking, like walk past, because this print shifts as you change through the space, and the hand comes and goes over the cup, right? But in a couple of them, you really see your forearm, and there's a whole story there.
Yes,
about something your dad told you, and So a lot of this it's very much about this relationship with your dad. How much doing this and making these paintings was, how much better do you feel like you got to know him? And was that something that was part of the work?
Yes, it was a part of the research process. Like I talked to a lot of people who knew him during this time. And that was interesting to get to know like a little bit about like him and also his relationship to alcohol. And I was just like, I had more like love and respect for him, like in that process of the work. So that was the initial stages when I wanted to figure out like how I wanted to deal with all these images, especially because he's not in them.
He's behind the camera.
Yeah, because he's behind the camera. So I do feel like I was looking at our relationship and then I wanted to think about like, okay, well, how could that be mirrored in other people potentially who are in these spaces? So the backstory for the tattoo that Amanda mentioned, it's one of 3 tattoos that I have for my dad, and it's a part of a conversation that we had like when I got older and I knew how to put my teenage angst into words. I told him how he made me feel, and then he took a while to get back to me, and I was very anxious about it. And when he came back to me, he said, Cydne, I might not be the greatest communicator, but know the love is always there. So my tattoo is just like ... the love is always there. And another reason, like another layer to that tattoo is like when I was going through a really rough patch in life, I accidentally spilled tea on my arm, like scalding hot water, and it burned my arm like right on the always, like down to like it turning white. And the always didn't fade. Like my tattoo like remained through the whole burn and the healing process. So it's like always been like this little good omen on my body about like just knowing that throughout all these situations that I might experience, or even like relationships, even if they have like distance to them, just know that the intention and the love is still pure. So that's why I wanted to include it in the show, not only because it's just like a nod to my dad and the whole like the erasure of the video, and me still through all of this, through understanding like him trying to navigate what he had been through and do his best by me. I knew the love was always there. So that was something I wanted to highlight in the work, but also something that I wanted to highlight potentially in the relationships that these people had. For whatever reason that they're here in this space, whether it be to celebrate, whether it be to like, hey, I need to catch a break. Maybe it's like actually running away. Like there's still like a humanness in these people. They're not just what they're doing. They're not just their addiction, but they're like, there's love and there's like a soul and an inner child in all of these people. So that's like one of the reasons why that tattoo pops up in a few pieces. Like if, yeah.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. John told me the story because I was asking, I was like, I wonder why that's there. So, and it's really beautiful because the always is like highlighted. It's almost like there's a spotlight on it, right? It's really beautiful. So, yeah, I also, going back to like your technique, I thought there might be slides, but there's not. There probably are if you're watching it on the live stream.
Oh.
So I remember when you first started kind of going back to your art practice, it was like very two-dimensional. Like I said, you came from a graphic design background, or you'd stopped and gone to work as a graphic designer. We'd worked together on a couple of catalogs, and I was at the National Gallery, did a couple of catalogs for us, some other projects. And you started kind of scanning images and then playing with sort of replacing, again, sort of almost like you do in the paintings, like that you replace maybe what the fabric of the trousers was with a different texture. And I remember a series that really stood out to me was the Specimen series that you did, which was post Hurricane Dorian, which I think I have a couple. I'm very happy to have.
Yeah.
And that was in Refuge, I think. I can't remember. Yeah. And again, that's almost like what the studies look like now. Yes. So can you speak to how your practice kind of evolved from that? Because, you know, I'm looking at these now, and like I said, it's been sort of really a joy to watch it, that it went from being kind of this very flat kind of printed like collage in a computer to then collage with actual paper, but now you're actually like mixing sand into the paint. I mean, you get up to these, and sometimes like the surface is like 2 inches thick, right? There's areas that are very flat, like the wall again in that one that I keep pointing out, the way you've done the bricks, also in these bricks here. And every day I come in and I find something new. Like there's so much going on in them. Can you talk a little bit about how it's kind of become more elaborate and how you're playing with material and how much is sort of being a chemist and you're like mixing things in your studio? Like how much of that do you do? Is that just like play? And when do you figure that out?
Oh yeah, there's like play. There's a lot of play.
Looks like there's play because it looks quite fun. Like I just want to I want to get in the sandbox and like it's dirty.
Yeah, I love to like experiment and see what can happen, and I'm happy that I've made it to that point because, like you said, like the flat digital collages, they act as sketches or preliminaries, me figuring out like what's gonna happen. Now and initially that was how I felt comfortable navigating the work.
They're still great works. I mean, I went back. Like I said, I've got a few at home. I'm lucky enough, and I still sometimes you'll make sketches, and they're still like just as art objects already amazing. So I think you've got all these like different levels to your work too, which is interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. And like to the point that you said, like sometimes people would see them and they'd be like, well, why are you trying to like make them? Because they feel like finished works.
That's a good question. Let's pretend I asked that.
And for me, like it was like, I don't know, like, you know, sometimes you go to art school and you're just like, it's not art unless it's like this. So there's a little bit of that in the back of my head, but also what I was navigating when I first started, when I reintroduced my practice, was navigating perfectionism. And I knew that in the digital space, I could clean it up as perfectly as I wanted, but I knew when I took it into like that, to the human hand, like I had to just accept the error. I had to accept the humanness of the production. So that's why for me, like even now when I talk about these works, whether it be about my relationships to myself, my relationship to my family, or like these social settings here, like I have to accept the humanity in all of it by doing it by
imperfection.
Accept the imperfection and humanity by doing it by hand, and just like letting some of the meticulousness go. I mean, it's still there. I still want it to look good. But that's why I like to physically do it. And now I'm to the point where it's just like I can accept what good enough looks like. So I can really just enjoy making the work and experimenting and seeing like what happens, and even like being a little bit more loose with some of the things. So it's just like before, it's just like everything had to be flat. Everything had to be perfectly like flatly colored, or it's just like nothing could have had like variation. So it's like now I'm playing like with washy brush strokes or like different textures and ways that's just like
hair. This lady's hair in the back, the green that over there. I'd love that with the kind of wave she's got going on.
Yeah. So it's just like how the textures like show up. I'm not trying to clean them up more than they have to be cleaned up. You know, it's just like, let it be, like, let the situation be what it is and let the work be what it is. So I'm no longer like a slave to the material. And like, I see Heino in the audience, and that's one of the things Heino used to tell me in class, like, don't let the material bully you.
You know? Yeah, and some of them have sand. Is there sand in some of them?
Yes, there is sand in some of them. And I like to take sand very specifically from Cabbage Beach because it's man-made. On a technical level, it's easier to work with because it's man-made and it's softer, but also because it's man-made and it's fake. And there's like so much politics around like who has access to Cabbage Beach. I like to take it.
For the people who might be watching that don't know, Cabbage Beach is a very nice beach on formerly known as Hog Island, now Paradise Island, rebranded for the tourists. Very difficult for Bahamians to get there. And there's no trans, right? So first of all you need a car, and then
you need $1
park, and
you need $1.
Yeah, exactly. You need a couple dollars.
Yeah,
to get over the bridge. Yeah, and I didn't know it was man-made sand.
Yeah, so like one of the things, like there's certain sections of it that are more man-made than others, and you could always like kind of tell which beach is man-made because when like there's a big swell or a hurricane, like it just like disappears. Yeah, so they always have to come back and like shift the beach a bit.
Keep it fresh for the tourists.
Yeah, but it's nice sand. Like it feels good under your feet, and like when you work with it, it's easier to manipulate. Like when I get sand from other beaches, there's like more coral in it. There's bigger chunks of shells, which I don't mind. Like, but it's just like no, like I would like to continue using the sand for my own personal reasons.
So speaking about the tourists, I mean, this particular body of work isn't so much completely tied to that, but it does pop up. Like you see these little, you know, you've got like little better, and you know, especially in the one that we had in
Untitled,
which you're not going to see tonight, but the one that we had in Untitled, the guy at the bar, and he was like, "Now's not the time, Chief." Right? How much do you feel that kind of leaches in even to this, like this again, this culture we're in, where we're expected to be like loose and fun all the time, and we're marketing alcohol a lot? Do you feel like that's something that kind of seeps into these, or that is part, like probably many of these humans had to work in the tourist industry, and how much has that kind of affected your life and affected to the fact of like you're going to be drinking more, you're going to have to be putting on a certain persona, which requires
as even and
even the entrails of fabric, right? I mean, that's
So yes, I do feel like the tourism industry and like having a lot of jobs here are tied to hospitality. And I always say like hospitality is such a specific industry. It's not like something that I feel like everybody should be expected to go into. It's just like you need to have the personality for hospitality. And like Bahamians are hospitable, but there's like the expectancy that you're gonna go into like this job where your primary goal is to make other people feel good, to serve them, to make their stay enjoyable, to like, how can I make your day better? It's like you have to come into work ready to ignore all of everything that you're dealing with because you care so much about others. And that might not be everybody's position, especially when it's the primary industry. It's like, statistically, I don't feel like everybody wants to be in hospitality.
Who's doing it? Yeah, definitely.
Who's doing it, especially, and that creates a layer of stress, especially when you have to. That creates a layer of stress, and then also if you're having to engage with guests in some sort of way, like especially in serving, like sometimes I've been this person, like this drunk person who's just like, why don't you drink with me? Come on, have a good time. Ignore what you're doing. Like people do experience that. And that's another layer of just like how you could get sucked into it. So I do think about like tourism and just like the whole history the Bahamas has had, like with alcohol, when you go from piracy, rum running, like trade, like you know. So it's just like we've always had like been some thoroughfare for like some sort of drug of some sort. And when you come here, there's this expectancy like, oh, I'm coming here to vacation. I'm coming here to escape. Like I'm going to use these libations to help me escape. This is an area where I'm just going to expected to have a good time. Nobody's around. Like I had some old tourism ads that I had in my studio when I was in New York when I was initially working on this stuff. And some of them was just like, come in, this is Ted and Jane's Bahamas. Like come in, come to the Bahamas where like and enjoy the 18th century or something like that. And it's just like, where's your island? So there's all these things about ownership of the space and escape. And I started to think, it's just like, well, where do we escape? I was like, I can't think of like the access to many parks, especially like the policing of the beaches in some ways. And it's just like the thing that's readily available to us is the bar.
It's bars, yeah.
Is the bar. Like you could go in there and like depending on which one you go to in your relationship to the bartender, like you could get like just like a cheap drink, or you just might just want to sit up. Sometimes you like so they kind of go hand in hand.
Not a lot of spaces where it's like okay to sit outside, you know, in that way of relaxation that tourists get. I think that's something that people that aren't from here don't understand, is that we're actually not really encouraged to go hang out at the beach
and
take up that space.
Yeah. Especially like as a, like, and me, like coming from this being a woman, like when you're a woman going to the beach, you need a buddy. Like you can't go to the beach here alone. Like you better off just staying in your house being miserable. Like don't go to the beach by yourself here as a woman. So it's just like the spaces that we have, like sometimes like the bar might be one of the safer places for you to go. I'm not saying that's what it is for everybody, because of course there are people who found like their ways. Like you could go to the gym if you have the money to go to the gym. You could go to the beach if you're off. You can go. Like,
is there anything in the title? It just came to me. Is there anything as a kind of a longing to be one of the boys, to shed the, because, you know, again, you've spoken about, well, as a woman in a bar, this would happen. As a woman at the beach, this would happen. Is there any sense of like, what would it be like to actually be one of
the boys?
To not be in this body and to be able to access this kind of pleasure or this kind of relaxation outside of
that's a very good question. I would say consciously, there was one point in my life, yes, 100% yes. And that's why I could tap into that, because I know what that felt like to be one, like wanting to be one of the boys, because being a woman at the time just felt so tough, you know, especially as like young women, it just felt like too much. So I can tap into that. Now I would say no. Like, even though I understand like that I occupy or I live a different life to my male counterparts just because of how society is set up, like I'm happy with being being a woman. I also know that being a man ain't like, it's not like nothing. Like there's weight and pressure to that too, and that also shows up in them.
It shows up in the work too.
It shows up in
your father. Yeah.
Just like in general, like these people seeking reprieve. Because there is like a weight that men carry when you think about what all a man is supposed to be, like the way that the patriarchy has set it up, like that's heavy to carry. Like nobody actually wins. So even though like the work is talking about me being one of the boys, like that also is an element of just like, what would it be to carry this weight? Like when I came into the work thinking about why I would like abandon something at home to come here, like what would that weight feel like as well? So it wasn't necessarily a longing, it was more like a headspace to just like enter and know that I could come out of if I needed to come out of, you know.
So I'm just thinking, we've been chatting for about an hour now. I'm wondering whether anyone in the audience wants to ask Cydne a question.
Hi.
Or anyone who's watching the live stream. I'm assuming they can type you a question, Ramel. Ramel's nodding. Yes, if you're watching the live stream, you can ask Cydne a question.
Yeah.
Anyone? No, everyone's going to be shy. Seriously? With this crowd?
Wow.
Wow, I know. Very disappointed in you all.
I put on my good clothes and everything.
Should we go get a drink?
Wait.
Well, as I said, I would love to spend more time just actually going up close to them. If you haven't been to see the show, please do. Because like I said, there's so many details. Like every day I come in and I'll stop in front of one and I'll just see like the leg sticking out with the tights there and the little gemstones on the tights. And then, I don't know, over here, like the bottles and this lady's hair over here. And there's just all these like, little details that up here with it's like the lips on the wallpaper.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes I feel like they're kind of surreal. You know, sometimes I feel like they're like dipping into surrealness. Yeah. So, someone's got a question. Oh, we talked long enough. Yes. Okay. I'm going to give you my mic. 2 questions.
Let's go.
2 questions. It's just so people
Huh?
Okay. Please. Oh, sorry. Is there another one before?
You got the mic now.
Okay. So in some of your previous work, thank you for being here. Thank you for this work. In some of your previous work, I know some of the patterns you've used have referenced the body more literally. I know they've included some imagery of cells, And I wonder if that comes into context with this work, especially considering the body in relation to alcoholism.
Thank you. That was a great question. And for anybody who didn't hear, she was asking like how I use different. Just correct me. Just make sure I got it all. In my previous work, I've used like different imagery to depict the body, whether it be like something that's like more natural or it's just like the actual physical body, my actual physical body, and how that might show up in these works. And was I thinking about the way that alcohol affects the body? So when it came into the collage, no. But when when I added patterns on people, I was thinking about it, but more colloquially. So it's just like some people might have a very watercolor effect on them. And I was thinking about when somebody's really drunk, you say they wet. Or like somebody here has like a rose pattern like all over their body, and just like when they're really drunk, you're rosy. So I was thinking more about colloquialisms rather than the effects of alcohol per se. So the patterns speak more to it than like the collage does. Yeah. And yay.
Hey, first, congratulations.
Thank you.
On a great show.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think my question is going to be along the same lines of formal aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more about your color considerations and its intensity in relation to its content.
So I've always like had, I have a love for color. And there's something healing about being in colorful spaces. So there's a layer of, in my work and in my practice, like I do have all of these tough conversations, and I do explore the roots of grief and trauma and the ways that they show up. But at the end of it, I'm questioning our capacity for healing. So when I have these color palettes, like it's just like junk new is the aesthetic, but I'm also thinking about like, okay, I've made peace with this. And it's also like inviting for you to actually be able to engage this topic. And that's something that I want people to be able to do. And I feel like people who know me and have been like very close to me is like they might have experienced that, like having deep conversations with me is like something that I like to do, but also something that I try to make easy for other people to do. And I know that through color and pattern, that does something to like the brain, so you're able to engage with the work a bit easier when it's like more vibrant. But with this work, like Amanda said, if you've looked at my previous work, I really was trying my best to like mute it down a bit. It's still bright and it's still vibrant, so it still looks like me, but my last set of work was like full on neon. It was full on technicolor, and that's also something that I recognized showing outside of the Bahamas and traveling outside of the Bahamas. People always ask like, how does your work change? Aesthetically, it got brighter because I think I was trying to hold on to what home felt like, what the tropics felt like. Like I know when I wake up, it's clear, it's not gray and just concrete. Like I look outside and I see bougainvillea in the sky, you know? So I was trying to remember that, so my work just got brighter. And once I was back home, because I made a point to make this work home, it was easier for me to mute my color palette down a bit because I didn't feel like I had to overcompensate in the work for the environment, because it's just like, it's bright, but it ain't this bright, girl. Like, calm down. You know? So it was just easier to do. So I hope that I answered all of your questions. Yeah.
Cydne, we have a question from YouTube from Eric McLaughlin.
Eric McLaughlin, sir. Yeah.
Apologies. Eric asks, are there materials and or mediums that you hope to work with but haven't yet?
Good question. So for people who don't know, Eric is my boyfriend.
When I threw your drink at the car.
Yeah, this is the one who fussed me about drinking in the car, rightfully so. But thank you, Eric. That was a really good question. So yes, I've been thinking more and more, like there's like bougainvillea pattern that showed up in the work, and I was starting to think more and more about like native flora and fauna. and just like what it would look like to actually start to use them, because I source a lot of my papers. And I like to get papers that remind me of home in some way. So whether it be the pattern or the material. So there's some papers that are just like, oh, this is like a mango paper, so I use mango leaves. So I actually was considering like, what would it be like if I start to use some of the native flora and fauna physically in the work in a way that's like actually sustainable. Make paper, make ink. What could that look like? That's one thing that I've been thinking about wanting to use. And even like, I don't know, like the world's my oyster, so maybe like glass is something that I also was thinking about. Not necessarily like stained glass or mosaics. That, I mean, that could be cool, but I just thinking about different materials that could be interesting to bring into play.
Yeah, and you have actually moved from canvas. There's one here, which is on canvas, which is an older work, to panel. How has that changed your practice?
Oh yeah, 100%. The first time I worked on panel, I said I'm never going back, and I'm sorry for people who have to ship my work. But I like working on panel. It's like it allows you to just play so much more because you don't like you have a substrate that can handle it. And I feel like there's even like a conversation there to have a substrate that can handle all the stuff that I'm putting on it. Yeah,
yeah.
there's a conversation.
Metaphor right there.
But it's just like when I have to collage and like even the way that I can clean things up because it's on panel, like I could really like carve into the work. And one of them I actually did start to carve into them. I dremeled into one of these pieces here, so it allowed me more ability to play, because I started using canvas because it was what I knew, it was what I used in college, and like getting my feet wet, I had to doggy paddle before I could swim. So canvas was more of a doggy paddle. And like I still like working on canvas. But panel I feel like are harder substrates that have like resilience are probably here to stay. There we go. I got them. hmm 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 Yeah. hmm Mm. hmm
Like him not being here?
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful question. And I see you in that, Cavante. Thank you. Um, yes, I would say that there was a good enoughness. I feel like in some of the interviews that I had, um, and I hope this isn't too personal, but my dad had actually talked to a therapist. And like I actually was able to reach out to him, and he remembered my dad. Um, and he didn't like tell me anything about them, but just like I talked to him about like how people's dependency on alcohol is developed. But in like some of the conversations I had about my dad in developing this work, I saw so much of him trying. Oh, I saw him so much of him like trying to like heal and do right by me. So it's just like even though he wasn't perfect, like yes, like I feel like there was a lot of healing in this process of navigating this space and putting myself in these scenarios with these men, but also thinking about him and even watching the video, like there's a lot of jovial energy that he had. Like I talked to a lot of people about like, oh, I'm say daddy like when he was drunk, because I never would have seen it. And apparently like he was the same person. Like he was just like there wasn't a side of him that I missed out on. He was just like just walk a little slower. His voice was a little slurred, but he was the same like fun-loving guy, like always cracking jokes. So I don't feel like I was able to be at peace to know that the version of my dad that I was able to get was him. So I don't feel like I missed out on things because of course like as you get older things are bittersweet, but you also look at things through rose-colored glasses. You know, for me he's frozen in amber. It's like the version of him that I have is just like that's the version that I got, and like I loved him, you know. And in this work I made peace to know that there's certain things that maybe I never get to know about him, but that's okay because the parts that I did get to know like were beautiful in their complicatedness. So yeah, this work was very healing. Like the process of making this work. By the time I get to making pieces, whatever the work is about, like I'm already like healed from it. So by the time I get to making the work, I'm not like crying on the paintings or none of that sort of stuff. I've already like gone through a lot of the mental hurdles and hoops by the time I actually get to making the physical work. So I was happy that I was able to go through the process of understanding the aspects of him that were difficult or people might have like shunned or like been like, oh, what's the problem with that? And I've done that with other works as well and other research as well. But in this body of work, I feel like this was the last thing that I never really understood, and I got to understand it. And it's just like, good on you, Carlton. Like, good on you. No, feel good.
That feels like a nice, good on you, Carlton. Feels like a pretty good place to end, but I don't want to cut anyone off unless anyone's got a question. So I think good on you, Carlton. Good on you, Cydne.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. The show is up until mid-January, so if you haven't been to see it, please come back. And I don't know what you're giggling about, but you behave yourself, Angelica.
She's being good. I'm the asshole.
So thank you all for being here. Thank you for those who tuned in for also being here. And yeah, that's it. Good on you, Carlton.
Good on you, Carlton.